Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Panya Yu, and I will be moderating this webinar together with my colleagues, Alex Floshby and Haoyi Chen. This webinar is jointly organized by the Global Network of Data Officers and Statisticians and the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. If you're not a member of the Global Network yet, I invite you to join us. Alex, can I ask you to share a link in the chat box for joining the Global Network webinar? Before I introduce the topic and speakers, I'll just invite Haoyi to say a few words about the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Survey. Haoyi, please.
Thank you so much, Panya. Really great pleasure to collaborate again. Look forward to continue our working together on the webinar series. So my name is Haoyi, and coordinator for the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. A few words about this group, established in 2015 by the UN Statistical Mission to achieve 3 goals: coordinating survey activities at various levels, advancing innovative approaches in household surveys, and also advocate for the role of household surveys. The group currently has 11 international organizations, a member in 10 member states, and co-chaired by the World Bank and UNESCO Institute for Statistics. UNSD is the secretariat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Haoyi. Today, we are delighted to welcome 4 speakers: Francesca Perucci, Haoyi Chen, Elizabeth Lockwood, and Diana Osorio, who will present on the topic of data for intersectionality, data sources for more equitable and inclusive data systems. Since 2015, data efforts supporting the Leave No One Behind principle has advanced beyond simple disaggregation. An intersectionality approach is now fundamental. Open Data Watch has developed a practical framework linking intersectional data concepts to policy for impact. However, challenges persist in generating data that captures the full spectrum of intersecting identities. Integrating multiple data sources beyond household survey is crucial to reflect the lived experiences and address complex vulnerabilities effectively. To this end, this webinar will discuss intersectional data needs, production challenges across the data value chain, and informing policy with research. It will also explore using diverse data sources like household surveys for vulnerabilities and outlines future steps for communities to systematically produce and apply intersectional data. Let me introduce our 4 speakers. Francesca Perucci is Director of Policy and Partnerships at Open Data Watch. She held various key positions within the UN system and became Assistant Director of the United Nations Statistics Division until recently. Haoyi Chen works at the UN Statistics Division and is the coordinator of the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. She leads the work on citizen-generated data and data integration. Elizabeth Lockwood is CDM Global's representative to the United Nations, where she develops advocacy strategies to raise awareness, strengthen capacity, and lobby for the rights of persons with disabilities. Finally, Diana Osorio is the head of the Intersectional and Differential Statistics Unit of Colombia's National Administrative Department of Statistics, or DANE. Before we proceed, I just want to remind you of some housekeeping rules. Our speakers will have 35 to 40 minutes to present. We will then have a Q&A session following their presentation. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to write your comments and questions into the chat box at any time. During the Q&A session, we encourage you to ask questions directly by using the raise hand function, or if you wish, we could also read out the questions on your behalf. Just let us know. And as usual, the Global Network webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Global Network after the event. We invite you to continue the discussions there. Now I'll just hand over to our first speaker. Francesca, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
Your presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, Panya, and thank you so much, both you, Panya and Alex, for hosting us and inviting us and giving us the opportunity to talk about intersectionality and more broadly about inclusive data systems and how we can work through the data collection programs, the data sources that we are engaged with, we work with to make that a reality. So as you said, Panya, the idea of intersectionality and overall, bringing more inclusive data and building more inclusive data systems has been sort of gaining recognition over the years. And we started, if you can go to the first slide, we started, I think, years ago. We can go back to even the MDGs talking about data disaggregation to highlight some of the disparities and the inequalities in how people experienced and shared outcomes, development outcomes. But the real big push for data disaggregation came with the SDGs adoption in 2015, and more importantly, the principle of leaving no one behind. So the IAG SDGs, you're all familiar with that, the group that deals that sort of work to implement the indicator framework for the SDGs, has engaged from the beginning in making giving a framework and offering a guidance on how to disaggregate data and how to disaggregate the indicators to highlight the experiences of the different groups and how they share the progress under each target, especially the targets that were focusing specifically on some of the more marginalized groups. Now, from there, I think the conversation started to go well beyond data disaggregation. There were initiatives like the Data Value Project by GPSED and other partners, highlighting more of the how data agency can happen in society, how people can gain more ownership and be participating more actively in the whole data process. We had the initiative of the Inclusive Data Charter and many others. But overall, the idea was to build more inclusive data systems that really are built to represent all individuals, that you have those tools and data solutions that can capture experiences, people's realities, including those that are normally not well reflected in the more sort of traditional approach to data operations. And overall, a focus on how data can really have an impact for change. So if you move to the next slide, the concept of intersectionality became increasingly recognized as a good approach to understand the real sort of lived experiences of individuals. We borrowed, so to speak, the concept of intersectionality. The term was coined the first time by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. She was a pioneer in studying the intersection of race and gender. And in fact, the discussion on intersectionality really started from the gender data community. Initially, it was a lot of focus on gender and intersectionality, understanding the intersection between sex and other identities. But in a nutshell, I think we can define intersectionality as a way to understand people's experiences as they are shaped by multiple intersecting identities. So, normally we look at different dimensions like race, ethnicity, class, gender, date, age, disability, migrant status, etc., sexual orientations, and others. So how do we go from intersectionality to data intersectionality? If you can move to the next slide, we highlight, what we mean as an approach for data intersectionality is an approach that really offers that understanding of how these multiple social identities influence a person, individual's experience and outcomes. It also highlights disparities that we would miss, that would be hidden if we only look at single dimensions individually, right? But instead of looking at those dimensions at the same time and how they intersect to determine experiences. And also we consider, this is an approach that really considers how these different social identities can shape data throughout the whole data value chain. It's not just about how you define these dimensions, it's really how these different groups participate in the whole data value chain from the beginning to the end. And Open Data Watch has recently developed a framework to understand intersectionality, but more importantly, to operationalize intersectionality. So what is needed and what are the elements to really implement intersectionality in a data system? And if you move to the next slide, I show here the framework in a simple diagram, and this is very, very condensed, so I'm happy to share the link in the chat that goes to the paper that's beyond this framework that explains more in detail how the framework works. But in a simple way, to just summarize it, I would say that data are at the center, and you need to define the data that really reflects all the individual experiences. So looking at all data dimensions, and I don't use the word disaggregation deliberately here because it's not really about disaggregating this data, it's about the whole data value chain and how you produce those data with that in mind, being inclusive and being able to reflect all individual experiences. And from there, from data, the next level is the impact on policies. So it's ensuring that the data are really relevant to those policy issues and the type of data that can really have an impact on those policy issues, which is the broader, the larger circle, the impact. But to allow that to happen, the critical element here is really agency. So how you empower people, citizens, but people in general, to really create strong agency in data throughout the whole data value chain. So, and in the next slide, I show what we mean by this, really taking an inclusive data approach along the whole data value chain. That goes, I'm sure you're all familiar with the data value chain from production to use, with all the different stages: collection, publication, uptake, impact. But as you see, the first block here under collection, which includes identify, collect, and process, is the most packed. And I try to pack and squeeze a lot into that little box, because I think this is really the crucial part of the whole data value chain, where you really identify policy relevant groups that are missing in data, determining the dimensions, the characteristics that need to be looked at. And when the citizens really can engage in all the data operations, you can establish partnerships, collaboration, depending on the data operations and the data tools that you're going to use. Like in citizen data, this is crucial because this is the moment where you establish the collaboration and the partnership to co-create the data collection tool. So, but you can also have other forms of collaborations. You can have consultations with relevant groups, especially when you use a more traditional data collection approach. It's even more important that the consultations are very well prepared and very well conducted to ensure the full participations of those you are trying to include in the data. And then, of course, you go into the second phase, where it's so important to protect data privacy and security, ensuring the safe and ethical use of data. And this, we all know, it's a critical phase of the data value chain, and becoming increasingly more relevant. And it's particularly important when we talk about marginalized groups and some parts of the populations that might need to be really protected from violations of human rights and other safety issues that they face in depending on their specific circumstances. And then, you know, identify what the data availability and gaps are through the processing and analysis of data. And then you go to the uptake, improving connectivity, ensuring data access by all, including and in particular persons with disabilities, those who might not have easy access to data, increasing data literacy, promoting data use, etc. And then the last one is about really understanding whether your data have impact, ensuring impact, understanding how the data can really be improve the data agency, how they can, you have that feedback going from impact, going back to the beginning of the data value collection, the data value chain, understanding, how you can bring more data agencies, how you can work more closely and more in consultation and collaboration with those groups. And then I try to unpack in the next few slides, if I still have a couple of minutes, Pania, just to say these are some of the other aspects that I highlighted in that framework. The inclusive policies, conduct robust policy analysis. This is the basic purpose of having intersectional data and agency over data, so that you can really have policies that are inclusive and that can deliver for all, including those that are normally not reflected in our the traditional data systems. Data agency, that's a key aspect of intersectionality, is really the ability and power of individuals and communities to be part of the data value chain. And finally, ensuring impact. So equitable data systems that can really have tangible and measurable results, and that are critical to build an equitable and safe data systems. So as I said, I put the link to the framework in the chat for those who want to read a little bit more about this. And my colleague Haoyi will go a lot deeper into looking at what this data systems needs in practice. In the last slide, I think the next is my last slide. I just want to stress the fact that the data systems we have today are still inadequate to deliver the data that we need to address intersectionality and to really help reduce inequality and promote social justice. And here I list some of these requirements to really build the systems we need. Data that capture the lived experiences of individuals with intersecting social identities. But it's very important that the concepts and definitions we use are agreed with the groups concerned. And this is something that is not normally done systematically. And individuals more at risk of being marginalized are the ones that should be really offered those tools and to become more active throughout the data value chain. Increasing use of participatory and inclusive approaches to data collection. Again, we will go much deeper into that and look at specific data sources, how we can do that. Including, using innovations for data collection, improving data governance systems to be more inclusive. Again, that's about agency and giving really a role to all those groups. And last but not least, for sure, increasing accessibility. That's very important, and we've seen that all the time. And it's accessibility throughout the data value chain, how we collect the data, how we make sure that those, who face certain limitations, and have to be included in the data collection processes. And then to the end of the value chain, of course, accessibility of being able to use the data and have impact. I'll stop here, Pania, back to you, and thanks again.
Thank you so much, Francesca. I'll hand over the floor to our next presenter, Haoyi Chen.
Pania, do you mind if I share my own screen? I actually made 2 additional points just now.
Not at all. Yes,
you.
please go ahead and share.
Okay, here I have it. Can you see my screen?
I do. Please put it into presentation mode. Yeah, perfect.
Is it now? Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, again, Pania, Alex, for the invitation, and thank you, Francesca, for setting the frame. So let me get into how much we can deliver in measuring or really reflecting and collecting data on intersectionality. Before I start, I just wanted to say a few words about the handbook revision. There is a reason for putting that here. So UNSD is doing a revision, revising the handbook on household surveys. The previous comprehensive version was 1984. The work is guided by the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on household surveys. We are going to submit it to the Commission, a draft handbook, March next year. The reason I'm bringing it up here is I actually went to the handbook draft and went through the content and see what is there that we can bring it over for this presentation. The handbook is pretty much structured along the line, the GSBPM, generic statistical business process model. I forgot the P, or the data value chain that Francesca has mentioned. So how can household surveys be more inclusive in many sense that we have been discussed earlier under the framework on intersectionality? Well, if we look at the identify needs stage at the very beginning, as a survey person, and we need to know what variables need to be included, what are the intersecting variables, and understanding these are they are different. They will be different across country, across communities, and that it's dynamic in nature. It might be different today and 10 years from now, or 10 years before this. So it's a topic we have as a survey designer to keep that in mind. So in the handbook, we had dedicated one chapter on needs identification, and here we need to emphasize the engagement of citizens and respondents that really try to understand what needs to be collected, how they should be collected. The handbook also goes a little bit beyond, we are going beyond the household. We're talking about including individuals living outside the household, non-traditional, we call non-traditional living quarters, collective households, or collective living quarters. And the other things that in that chapter on identifying needs, we talk a lot about how do we balance the demand from what data we should be collecting. Are we collecting data from a larger sample or sample size, and what's the budget? There are already other data sources we need to take into consideration. And this concept of proportionality, which means that we do not collect data that are not necessary, or we're not going to use, or not to be too intrusive in many ways. So these are some of the things that we've included in the handbook. And managing the data collection, this is in the handbook, but also in the chapter, remember, on gender. We have a chapter on gender and household surveys, mainstream gender, and then there's a lot of emphasis on how do we ensure the team that managing the survey, running the survey, are diverse. If we want the survey to be inclusive, our survey team needs to be inclusive. So that's the key message. On sampling, this has been always a challenge. How do we balance if we would like to have lived experience, for example? For a lot of people, with a lot of intersectional variables, how do we manage the sample size? There's a budget constraint always. We don't have as much funds as we need. Can we do oversample? If we would like to do oversample, do we have the right frame structure to help us with that? Some of the countries that do have a very nice consolidated or integrated sample frames, they can go and almost like a pick and choose, okay, let me oversample certain population groups with some of the characteristics available on the frame. But most of countries don't have this capacity or luxury of having frame. So next one is questionnaire design. Francesca had mentioned earlier. How do we really make sure that design is being done together, co-designed, or even with a lot of engagement from citizens, respondents? Under the handbook and also under the Inter-Secretariat Working Group, we have worked a lot on making surveys more respondent-centered. And think about designing a survey almost like how Apple designed a phone, that they seem to know what we want to see. So it's to design a survey that is really understanding what the respondents reflection or feedbacks to how would like to respond to a survey or would not like to respond to a survey. So we design the survey in that way to cater to their needs. And we emphasize a lot on the testing of the questionnaire. And this is also another point that we can engage and should engage with focus group discussion and or other means to engage with different communities to make sure that the questionnaire works for different communities of people. Data collection, Francesca has mentioned on ethical considerations. So in the handbook, there are quite a bit of covered. Respect for persons. So here we emphasize individuals to make considered and voluntary assessment of where to participate. Oops, sorry. Do no harm, and also making justice. So this is making survey more inclusive, broaden our opportunities for participation, make sure how we do not miss people by design. And the other thing is handling with care sensitive topics and stigmatized behavior. This we have quite a go beyond averages, look at the contingency tables and ANOVA hypothesis testing. Sorry, there's a regression modeling. We do have quite a bit modeling in the handbook. Now, lastly, dissemination. Then we talk about confidentiality, how do we interpret the data and communicating the results. So the survey completes with an inclusive lens. Now, household survey is one of the data sources that's definitely not sufficient to properly collect data on intersectionality, reflecting intersectionality nature. And that's why we have the Citizen Data Collaborative. A few words about the collaborative on citizen data. It's a group of people, communities working together from different communities. It was established in 2023, mandated by the Commission. It was to develop and finalize the framework on citizen data. We've already completed this work and provide a space to share knowledge, resources, experiences, foster collaboration, partnership, and provide a platform for advocacy and mobilize relevant stakeholders, bringing different communities together. And then we also develop methodological guides and to support communities for more sustainable production use of citizen data. The collaborative has 10 steering committee members. They're all listed here, and the collaborative is co-chaired by UNSD and International Civil Society Center. Now, so framework, we have 5 elements under the framework: concept definitions, principles, the role of national statistical offices, and we talk about the enabling environments. And lastly, the implementation roadmap. Let me just bring on the definition of citizen data to really emphasize on the importance of engagement. So the citizen data is really anchored and defined with huge emphasis on engagement, different stages of data value chain. We're talking about sufficient and meaningful participation of citizens. And then throughout, if possible, the entire data value chain. If it's too much or not there yet, we encourage that at least at the very beginning in the design stage and data collection stage for citizens to be engaged and sufficiently and meaningfully. And we are working a guide on what that means in the field. Now, my last slide. So our citizen data and survey linked to intersectionality. A huge word about it's really about engagement. Make sure that our respondents, our students, are part of that design. Otherwise, they are not responding to our surveys. And another thing is really emphasized now with let's think about a mixed method, and not just focus on quantitative data, but also on qualitative data. And how do we bring these two? This is a relatively new trend in national statistical offices, and some countries and NSOs have started working on that, and we are working on trying to find out how we can support NSO on this methodology. Now, lastly, I would like to end with coming guidance that are very much linked to this work. One is the guide on measuring intersectionality through citizen data. This is developed under the collaborative on citizen data collected by Open Data Watch and Elizabeth from stakeholder groups from persons with disability. And the other one is a guide on making surveys more accessible. And this is developed under the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on household surveys and led by my colleague Farrell. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Many thanks, Haoyi. Our next speaker is Elizabeth. So I'll give the floor to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm very pleased to be here to bring a lived experience example to this very important discussion. I'm going to provide two examples of data intersectionality from persons with disabilities, and persons with disabilities are inherently intersectional and many times have multiple intersections. So it's a very good example to use. And persons with disabilities tend to be more left behind and have less available, reliable, timely data that we can use. And it's also important to add that qualitative data is a key component that can be used in intersectional data processes, because this can really complement the quantitative data that are being gathered already. And the first example I'm going to share is with a partner from Kenya, the United Disabled Persons of Kenya, which is the umbrella organization of persons with disabilities, or OPD. And they have collected their own data with their communities, and I will provide some of these examples of the data they have collected from an intersectional lens. They have assessed a report around the 2022 general election, looking from a disability inclusive perspective. And the report highlights unique challenges of women with disabilities in particular, and how the women contested party primaries and nominations, as well as running as candidates themselves. Another example is government baseline research that involved collection of data on persons with disabilities, again, including women with disabilities who are much more left behind than their male counterparts. They also looked at level of education in pastoralist communities and evaluating level of participation in public affairs. So this was very important because it looked at gender, and it also looked at marginalized rural communities in this intersection. Another example is developing an assistive technology policy brief. And assistive technology is very important for persons with disabilities to have equal access to society and information. And the data collected involved looking at unique challenges of women with disabilities and how they encounter assistive technology, and also included collecting data on level of income and location. And another project focused on inclusive sexual reproductive health, targeting youth with disabilities and their lived experiences and all their diversities. And in turn, this affected policy proposals on inclusive sexual reproductive and health rights. And the last example from Kenya is research from 2023 that looked at inclusive financial services for persons with disabilities through a gender, location, and income level lens. And this initiative that was led by UDPK helped the government fill critical data gaps on persons with disabilities, especially around this intersection. So it's really important to show as an example of where this data can affect policy change. And the second example, I think, really nicely matches what Francesca highlighted, especially in her last slide. And I will go into detail about this. This is a project that my organization for which I work, CBM Global, we supported a project in the Philippines led by organizations of persons with disabilities. And one of them is a women's led organization of persons with disabilities. So you already have an intersectional piece right there. And they led a profiling of persons with disabilities in the city of Las Piñas. And now it is being replicated elsewhere in the country. But it was started in 2021, and the entire process was led by the community, by persons with disabilities. Persons with disabilities decided what data they wanted to collect. They decided how they were going to collect it. They had the accessibility they needed, such as sign language interpreters, and then they went through the process. And there was intersection absolutely in this data collection and in the whole data value chain, but in the disaggregation specifically from the project, all 20 villages in this city now have disaggregated data by disability through an intersectional lens, including population, the number, type, and causes of a disability or disabilities, age, gender, and gender included male, female, and LGBTQ community member, civil status, voting population, health status, educational attainment, again by gender, the three groups, employment status, types of employment by gender with the three groups, and disability ID status, and barriers to accessing services. And the last one is very important. It's typically not collected, and it's really important information to understand, so how those can be corrected. In the impact since this project, the city and all its 20 villages now have this intersectional data as a basis for designing relevant programs and policies and creating and devising the budgets that actually can make this change. There is improved engagement with persons with disabilities in local affairs, setting up offices and assistance desks, and this has helped service provision in these villages. And the Organization of Persons with Disabilities now has formed new partnerships with NGOs, private companies, and universities, and they're able to gain services that the government cannot provide, which is typical in many cases that we see. And one real practical example, gathering the data on disability IDs, originally only approximately 7,000 people had disability IDs in this city, and currently almost 24,000 have IDs now. So that's a real example of data that were needed. And now these people have access to services and food and other things through these IDs. And in 2024, this project was replicated in another city, and the work is continuing. And I think it's a real great example of using intersection led by the community, but with the local authorities through that whole data value chain. And I just want to emphasize again, this project and other projects that are successful like this is when statisticians and local authorities are co-creating with the community from the very beginning, but also that entire process. And I will end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Our last speaker is from Ghana. Diana, welcome.
Thank you so much, Panya. Thank you so much for the invitation to Open Data Watch and all my panel colleagues. I'm so glad to be here and share some details from our experience in Colombia. So I don't have so much time, so I want to focus my presentation in the key aspects or facilitators that allow DANE use and keep promoting all these differential and intersectional aspects. So the first slide, please, Panya. So the first one, in fact, with this context that my colleagues mentioned before, with the aim of leaving no one behind, one of the key aspects for us is the creation of the unit or specialized unit to try to promote and mainstream not only the gender perspective. We have been prioritizing working to the past maybe 10 years or more about ethnicity, disability, life cycle, and other, for example, peasantry. We have two versions of this unit in 2015. Right now, in 2019 until now, we create a new group, a new version of this group based on the IDC principles to try to inspire and inform the establishment of a working group to create this ability to mainstream the differential and intersectional to statistics at DANE, not only at DANE, within the national statistical system. So one of the main functions that we have currently is to create a guidelines or some kind of recommendations to include all this differential and intersectional process. As Francesca mentioned, it's not only disaggregated data, it's beyond that. It's try to describe all these intersectional aspects that maybe visibilize the lives of different population groups. So this is for the whole statistical process. So this is one of the main functions for this group. Besides that, we have to create or maybe to recommend all this, maybe create new statistical operations to include differential aspects, for example, for gender-based violence, for example, LGBTQ people or people with disabilities. The last one is related with what can we do with all this information. So we have to use this data and try to disseminate this information. So we create some statistical notes to try to disseminate and create awareness about the useful and the use of data about the differential aspects. So this group is attached to the highest directive body of the entity. This is one of the key aspects for us. The second one, please. The second is related with our national statistical plans. So I want to emphasize that DANE is committed with recognize the need to generate guidelines for the inclusion of differential intersectional aspects, not only in surveys, households, or administrative records. We want to engage more, for example, civil society organizations, so try to co-create all this data production in different I don't know, aspects, for example, employment or education or health and so on. So the last one, facilitator, is the law of official statistics, and one of the principles to statistics production is in fact inclusion. So we were committed with this through the whole statistical process. So we have to include all these differential characteristics of some population groups and seeking to highlight the living conditions. So these are three key aspects for us to try to, as I mentioned before, to try to implement in the national statistical production process. This next one, please. So one of the results, the main results for us, this is the first version of our guidelines for differential and intersectional mainstreaming in the national statistical system. This is a tool that provides conceptual, regulatory, and methodological recommendations to promote and guide to inclusion, not only maybe the variables of capture for different kinds of approaches, as I mentioned, ethnicity, life cycle, patient, gender, and maybe some intersectional aspects, for example, migrants. And the target audiences is DANE for sure, national statistical, policymakers, academia, civil society, journalists, and so on. If you want to consult, I can share for sure the link for this the version. We are currently working on an updating process for these guidelines. So we want to launch maybe in the second semester 2025, the new version of these guidelines. This is one of the main reference for the region, in special Latin America. So this is one of the results that the process and try to incorporate and create awareness about this differential and intersectional aspect. The next one, please. So this is maybe a brief description of the guide sections about what we have in this tool: conceptual framework, regulatory, the state of differential. I mean, maybe which is the diagnosis currently in our country, and final section that consolidate all this recommendation. And one of them, the specialized annexes related maybe with the care system, disability, ethnicity, include neutral gender, for example, language too. So the next one, please. I don't want to spend because as I mentioned before, we have been prioritized 5 differential approach: gender, ethnicity, disability, life cycle. But I want to maybe mention in this presentation that, as my colleagues mentioned before, ensure data collection tools can capture those intersecting aspects, it's not easy. This is the current challenge for all the National Statistical Office, but we have been working or use maybe some ways to try to visibilize all these intersectional aspects. So I want to maybe present and share some of successful case in Dani. This is one example. The next slide, please, Panya. The next, please. So I want to present maybe 4 examples that we have been using in the past years to try to, as I said, maybe try to recognize all these individuals' life experience. It's not the perfect, it's not the only one, but I think it's worth it. So one of them is the statistical note related with rural women and the rural poverty. The first one presents an overview of the living situation of women in rural areas, as well as information for women in different aspects. I mean, not only describe the women, we have to describe all this comparison between rural women and urban women. What happened with this group of populations in terms of employment, educational level, how many hours are we spending in care in our households, and so on. So this is one of the examples of the greatest examples, because this statistical note is maybe one of the main consulted from, for example, for the government to try to identify what gaps we have in terms of information. The other one is related with rural property. I want to show that this statistical note is related with social inequality from the distribution of land ownership. Maybe we know that difference between men and women. So this note is one of the first exercise that the National Statistical Office try to incorporate not only administrative records, because we are using cadastre integrated with administrative records and the census to try to interoperate them of this database, is try to describe all these key aspects that related with the land ownership. What are the main difference between the men and women? What happened with the access to the credit? What kind of maybe aspects do we have to take account to design the public policy in terms of rural women? The last one, the next slide, please. Other 2 examples that this is the other side, maybe for the LGBTQ plus P population. So we want, as Haoyi mentioned, the role of civil society organization. We have been working in the past maybe 2 or 3 years with new ways to maybe capture all this information through this app. The first one is App Diversa. The objective is to measure the probability that people will experience discrimination events. So we, in the new version of this app, we have been working about incorporate gender-based violence and see some key aspects or intersectional aspects to try to maybe measure in a better way the SDG number 16. So the idea is to test a new database technologies that facilitates the rapid and accurate creation, collection, or dissemination, this kind of information for this topic. And the last one is the LGBTQ pilot, because we want to share with all of you that this is a better example. This is a huge example for us because we did the pilot in 2023. So I want to highlight some key aspects, especially the strategic partnership with civil society to disseminate the survey. Not only the test, the instrument, the questionnaire, because we have to create, for example, a safety space. We have to identify all the the best way to try to use the correct language, which is the best way to try to engage more people in this safe space, because as we all know, this is a difficult population to capture, especially in terms of security for all of them. So we try to legitimate all this process through the civil society organization reviewing of, besides that, the mixed data collection methods. I mean, virtual self-completion or in-person support or follow-up via phone call, and the possibility of capturing this information offline. So these are, maybe I want to, this is my last slide. So for us, we want to show you a few examples that we have been, as I mentioned, a few examples that we have to try to describe and incorporate all these key aspects to the differential, not only disaggregation, try to describe beyond that, and try to include in all this sources information that we currently have available in DANE, and all these maybe strategic partnerships that maybe allow successful results to intersectional aspects in Colombia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diana, for sharing these very interesting examples of what's being done in Dani. There is actually a participant in the chat who asked for the links to these notes and guides, so it would be great if you could share those links in the chat. So thank you so much to our 4 speakers for sharing a lot of information and resources on this very important topic. It's now come to the Q&A session. I have allowed microphone and cameras to be turned on. So if you have any questions for our 4 speakers, please feel free to raise your hand. Do introduce yourself, what your name is, where you're from, and then also ask your question specifically to one of the 4 speakers if you can. Any questions for our speakers? I don't see any, so maybe let me ask one that kind of is at the top of my head. These days we cannot go 2 days without kind of hearing about technological advances that is happening in the world. So I wonder if there are any innovative methodologies or technologies that are showing the most promise for capturing the nuanced and lived experiences of vulnerable groups that we've been talking about. I think you have mentioned a couple in your presentation, but are there anything else that show particular promises in this field?
Who's going? Oh, everyone's smiling. Okay, I can start. Well, so the nuances, somehow, one thing is talking to people is still extremely important. So there are a lot of sensors you can guess. You can look at social media, but a lot of things still come out from really talking to a person and getting a sense of how they're, like, especially if we talk about lived experience. The growing up trajectory for one person as a child, the family background all the way, and how that influence the power, the dynamics, the experience of this person. This is something that is still difficult to get a full picture out of modern technology. But having said that, I've seen some of the, for example, some of the civil society organizations. There's a CSO called Video Volunteers that have been recording people's lived experience, recording their experience, especially in the very marginalized communities in India. And how to make all these huge amount of recording into something that researchers and policy makers can extract it's a lot of information. And then there's this where AI can come in and help processing and make those very qualitative data in the recording form, video form, into something that's quantifiable in the way. I'll stop here.
Yeah, very good point. So the technology is not doing the work of actually getting the data, but it's analyzing some of those very unstructured and qualitative data into something useful and insightful. Thank you, Haoyi, for that. Any other questions for our speakers from the participants? I still don't see any hands, so I'll just read a couple of questions from the registration form then. And perhaps we can hear from other speakers on this as well. One of the people who asked the question said, what are some of the practical examples of how intersectionality has been integrated into survey design? Would anyone want to take on this question? I don't want to just point to Haoyi again.
It's not. So I brought the handbook out. Sorry for but it's not there yet. I don't think we're there yet. Really bringing that intersectional piece into properly design and survey. And I have been trying to bring the engagement into the survey handbook revision. Say, look, we need to emphasize. And then there's quite a bit of pushback on doing that. One thing, because it's not documented, the impact is not documented. There's no controlled experiment on, you know how survey statisticians would like to see controlled experiments. That when you engage, when you don't engage, you see a difference, and then that's where people will be convinced. I think some of the things I think we need to do a little bit more. For example, Elizabeth Lee, you've done great work and on personal disabilities. But maybe do a small experiment on, you know, when we do this, when we don't do this, and this really shows the impact. That's where our people in the household survey committee will be convinced that it's making a difference. At this moment, it's we haven't really done a lot. That's why we're all suffering from the response rates crisis.
Thanks, Haoyi. I still don't see any hands. I'm not sure if there's a technical problem or people are just a bit shy today. Let me ask another question, and this can go to Elizabeth and Francesca. What kind of data can be used to tackle intersectional vulnerabilities, and how can we integrate more than one data sources?
Elizabeth, you want to go first? You want me to go first? I'll go first.
You can go first.
Yeah, I think that's a critical question, and somehow it also addresses your previous two questions, Panya, in the sense that we cannot think in terms of one data source when it comes to intersectionality, and that's the challenge, of course, with household surveys, right? It's really about building a whole system, and it's important to look at how you engage people, including in household survey data collection, how you engage groups from the beginning, from the moment you not just design the survey, but when you conceptualize what you want to measure and you engage all the groups that you want to capture, right? So it's about, again, going back to the data value chain and looking at all the different stages. And it's you use different data sources. You can use household surveys, although, as I always said, we're not there yet. The new manual is trying to provide some guidance on that, but we still need to build the capacity and to, I hate to say experiment, but to try some of those approaches. But then it's about integrating the different data sources and bringing the citizen data, using perhaps household surveys for some topics, for some areas, to benchmark and integrate with qualitative data, for instance, with citizen data, with specific, focusing on specific groups and focusing on specific issues. We know citizen data cannot be always compared across. Sometimes are very small scale initiatives, but that can help you understand the directions you need to take, where you need to focus, what is missing. So it's about bringing all these elements together. And the other aspect I want to mention that again covers a little bit also what you were raising earlier, Panya, is about the governance system of all this, right? Including when you use technologies. You can use technologies, and of course there are a lot of tools available today. And we've seen in the field, for instance, the use of apps for some groups that are very isolated and can use telephone apps to connect and to bring up some issues, right? It's not really about the data collection, it's about bringing some issues, but then it's about the overall governance system, how you make sure that you listen, how make sure that you really connect to those groups and you really understand how to bring them in and how to incorporate those issues. We call them in the citizen data community, we call them the red flagging, right? Raising the red flags, right? Trying to understand where those gaps are, because sometimes you're totally ignorant. The traditional data collection systems do not allow you to see beyond certain points, right? So those are important red flaggings, technologies, let's say, approaches. But Elizabeth has a lot of very concrete, good examples of where this has been done. Elizabeth, over to you.
I'll be very quick because I see we're over time. I just want to add on to what you've beautifully said already. We have an example of research in Bolivia on deaf Indigenous women and their access to healthcare services. And we found that you couldn't use traditional Bolivian sign language, that the women didn't have the same language or conceptual understanding of some access to health things. So things had to be done one-on-one, took a lot of time with deaf leaders from the communities to help. And we found data in this research that had never been found before, very powerful data. So this is another example to adapt to the community, because each community will be different, and this was different than the deaf community in La Paz versus the Indigenous peoples. Go ahead, sorry, thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca and Elizabeth, for answering this question. I know that sadly we are already over time. This is such a rich and important topic that it probably needs more than an hour to cover. But for now, again, we are very appreciative of our four speakers for taking the time to speak to the members of the Global Network today. And we hope to continue the conversation on this. Can I ask as a favor to everyone attending, if you could unmute yourself and turn on your camera, to please join me in just giving a big round of applause to all our speakers. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Diana, Francesca, and Elizabeth, for talking to us today.
Thank you, Panya. Thank you, Alex. Great to be here.
Thanks, everybody, for joining, and hope to see you at the next
Thank
Global
you.
Network
Thank you so
webinar.
much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.